The woman collapsed against his porch rail, blood seeping through the torn fabric of her dress. Thomas Garrett had been reaching for his morning coffee when he heard the horse stumble and fall just beyond his fence line. Now she stood before him, trembling, her dark hair matted with sweat and something darker. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind that swept across his ranch. "They're coming for me." Thomas set his cup down slowly, his weathered hands steady despite the shock. In 30 years of working this land, he'd seen plenty of trouble ride up to his door. But this woman, she carried something different in her eyes, not just fear, guilt. "Who's coming?" he asked, stepping closer. The morning sun caught the silver pendant at her throat, and he noticed how her fingers clutched it like a lifeline. "It doesn't matter." She shook her head, backing away. "I shouldn't have come here. I shouldn't have—" Her knees buckled, and Thomas caught at her before she hit the wooden planks. Up close, he could see the bruises along her jawline, the way her breathing came in short, painful gasps. This wasn't just exhaustion. Someone had hurt her, and recently. "Ma'am, you need a doctor." "No." The word came out sharp, desperate. "No doctors, no sheriff. No one can know I was here." Thomas glanced toward the horizon where dust clouds were beginning to form. Riders, maybe 3 or 4, moving fast across the valley floor. His ranch sat in a natural bowl, visible from miles in any direction. Whoever was chasing her would see his place soon enough. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, her eyes darting between his face and the approaching dust. Sarah Coleman." The name hit him like a physical blow. Coleman. He'd heard that name whispered in saloons and spoken in hushed tones at the general store. The Coleman gang had been terrorizing settlements for here to Colorado, leaving a trail of burned banks and dead lawmen in their wake. "You're Frank Coleman's daughter." She finished the sentence with a bitter laugh. "And if you know that name, you know why it's too late for me." The dust clouds were closer now, and Thomas could make out the shapes of horses and riders. His hand moved instinctively to the rifle mounted above his door, but Sarah grabbed his wrist. "Don't," she pleaded. "If you fight them, you'll die, and it won't save me." Thomas stared at the woman before him, weighing her words against everything he'd built on this land. His ranch represented 15 years of backbreaking work, of turning wild prairie into something that could sustain life. He'd buried his wife here, raised his daughter here until she'd married and moved east. This place was all he had left. "Why should I help you?" he asked quietly. "If you're Frank Coleman's blood, you've probably got innocent people's deaths on your conscience." Sarah's face crumpled, and for a moment she looked younger than her 20-some years. "You're right. I've done terrible things. Stood by while my father and brothers—" She stopped, unable to finish. "But I'm trying to leave. That's why they're chasing me." "Trying to leave with what?" Thomas pressed. "Bank money? Stolen gold?" She reached into her dress and pulled out a small leather pouch, heavy with coins. "This is my share from the last job. I was going to use it to disappear, start over somewhere they'd never find me." She held it out to him. "Take it, all of it. Just let me hide in your barn until they pass." Thomas didn't take the money. Instead, he studied her face, looking for deception. What he saw was exhaustion and something that might have been hope. "They won't just pass," he said. "If they're tracking you, they'll search every building, every hiding place." "Then I'll keep running," Sarah straightened, trying to summon strength she clearly didn't have. "I won't bring this trouble to your door." The sound of hoofbeats was getting louder now, accompanied by shouts and the jingle of spurs. Thomas could make out 4 riders, their faces hard beneath the brims of their hats. One of them, a man with graying hair and cold eyes, had to be Frank Coleman himself. "Sarah!" The voice carried across the valley like a whip crack. "Sarah, you come out now, and maybe we'll make this quick." Thomas felt something shift inside his chest, a familiar anger that he'd thought buried with his wife. Margaret had always said he had too much conscience for his own good, that he'd risk everything to help a stranger in need. She'd been right then, and apparently nothing had changed. "Get in the house," he told Sarah. "What?" "You heard me. Get inside, lock the door, and don't come out no matter what you hear." Sarah shook her head frantically. "You don't understand. My father will kill you just for talking to me. He doesn't leave witnesses." Thomas reached for his rifle, checking the chamber with practiced efficiency. "Maybe, but I've been dying slowly out here for 3 years anyway. Might as well make it count for something." The riders were close enough now that he could see the weapons they carried, the way they spread out in a practiced formation. This wasn't their first manhunt. "Why?" Sarah whispered. "Why would you risk this for me?" Thomas looked at her one more time, seeing something in her face that reminded him of his own daughter at that age. Scared, desperate, but still fighting. Because everybody deserves a chance to choose who they want to be. The Coleman gang rode into Thomas's yard like a storm front, their horses kicking up clouds of dust that settled on everything like a shroud. Frank Coleman dismounted first, his boots hitting the ground with deliberate weight. He was smaller than Thomas had expected, but there was something in his movements that spoke of violence held barely in check. "Morning," Frank called out, his voice carrying false pleasantry. "Fine day for a ride." Thomas stepped off his porch, rifle held loose but ready. "Can I help you gentlemen with something?" "Looking for my daughter, pretty girl, dark hair, probably scared out of her mind." Frank's eyes swept over the ranch buildings, cataloging every possible hiding place. "She took something that belongs to me." "Haven't seen anyone matching that description?" Frank smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "Now, that's interesting, because we tracked her horse right to your fence line, found it about a quarter-mile back, lame and abandoned." He gestured to his men, who began spreading out around the yard. "Funny thing about tracks, they don't lie." Thomas kept his expression neutral, but his grip tightened on the rifle. "Lot of wild horses in these parts. Could have been anyone. Could have been." Frank nodded thoughtfully. "But it wasn't. See, I know my daughter, and I know she's got a soft spot for lost causes. Probably spun you some story about wanting to change, about leaving the family business." He spat in the dirt. "Sarah always was too sentimental for her own good." One of Frank's men, a lean, scarred man with dead eyes, had worked his way around to the side of the house. Another was checking the barn, his hand resting on his gun butt. The third remained mounted, watching the horizon for any sign of approaching help that would never come. "Here's what's going to happen," Frank continued, his voice dropping to a conversational tone that somehow made it more threatening. "You're going to tell me where she is, and I'm going to take her home. Then you're going to forget you ever saw any of us. And if I can't help you," Frank's smile widened, "then we'll tear this place apart board by board until we find her. And when we do, you'll wish you'd been more cooperative." A shout came from the barn. "Nothing here, Pa. Check the house," Frank called. Back, never taking his eyes off Thomas. "I'd rather you didn't," Thomas said quietly. "I'm sure you would." Frank drew his pistol with fluid grace, the barrel catching the morning light. "But I don't. Much care what you'd rather." The scarred man was already on the porch, reaching for the door handle. Thomas knew that in seconds, Sarah would be discovered, and whatever slim chance she had of escaping her father's reach would be gone forever. "She's not here," Thomas said, desperation creeping into his voice despite his efforts to stay calm. "Then you won't mind if we look." Frank cocked his pistol, the sound unnaturally loud in the morning air. "Step aside, old man. This doesn't have to be your fight." But it was his fight now, had been from the moment he'd decided to help her. Thomas raised his rifle, knowing it was probably the last thing he'd ever do. "I said she's not here." Frank's expression hardened. "Wrong answer." The standoff stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest movement. Thomas could hear his own heartbeat, could smell the sweat and leather and gun oil that seemed to follow violent men wherever they went. Frank Coleman's finger rested on his trigger, and Thomas knew that in another second, blood would soak into the dry earth of his yard. Then the front door opened. "Stop!" Sarah stepped onto the porch, her hands raised, the leather pouch visible in her right palm. "I'm here, Pa. Let him be." Frank's gun never wavered, but his attention shifted to his daughter. "There's my girl. Knew you couldn't have gotten far on foot." "I have your money," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "All of it, just like you wanted." "Oh, sweetheart." Frank's laugh was cold as winter wind. "This stopped being about money the minute you ran. This is about family loyalty, about respect." Thomas watched the exchange, seeing the way Sarah's shoulders sagged with each word her father spoke. This wasn't just about stolen money or family honor. This was about control, about a man who couldn't bear to let anything slip from his grasp. "She's trying to do right," Thomas said quietly. "Why can't you let her go?" Frank's attention snapped back to him. "Because she's my blood, my responsibility, and I don't abandon family, no matter how far they stray. Even when they want to leave? Especially then." Frank's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Sarah's been confused lately, listening to the wrong voices. But she'll come around. They always do." Sarah stepped down from the porch, moving slowly toward her father. "I'll come with you, Pa. Just don't hurt him. He was only trying to help." "Help?" Frank's eyebrows rose. "Help you steal from your own family? Help you betray everything we've built together? Help me find a different path." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Frank's men shifted nervously, sensing the tension building between father and daughter. Thomas could see the conflict playing out in Sarah's face. Love and fear and desperate hope all warring for dominance. "There is no different path," Frank said finally. "There's only family and there's only survival. Everything else is just pretty words that get people killed." Sarah reached into her dress and pulled out the silver pendant Thomas had noticed earlier. It caught the light as she held it up, and he could see it was a locket, old and worn smooth by countless touches. "Mama gave me this," she said softly, "before she died. You remember what she used to say about second chances?" For the first time, Frank's expression flickered. "Your mother was a dreamer. Dreams don't stop bullets." "Maybe not, but they're still worth having." Sarah opened the locket, revealing a tiny photograph inside. She believed people could change, that it was never too late to choose a better way. Frank stared at the locket for a long moment, and Thomas saw something pass across his face. Grief, maybe, or regret. But it was gone as quickly as it had come. "Your mother's dead," Frank said harshly, "and dreams die with the dreamers." The moment stretched between them like a bridge over an abyss, and Thomas could feel the weight of all the choices that had led to this point. Sarah stood in the middle of the yard, the locket still open in her palm, while her father's gun remained trained on Thomas's chest. Then Sarah did something that surprised them all. She closed the locket, but instead of putting it away, she walked over to Thomas and pressed it into his free hand. "If I don't make it out of this," she said quietly, "I want someone to remember that I tried." Frank's face darkened. "Sarah, get away from him, now!" But Sarah didn't move. Instead, she turned to face her father, and Thomas saw something new in her posture. Not defiance exactly, but a quiet kind of strength. "No, Pa, I'm done running, and I'm done being afraid. If you want to kill me for trying to leave, then do it. But I won't watch you hurt innocent people anymore." "You think this man is innocent?" Frank gestured toward Thomas with his gun. "He's harboring a fugitive. That makes him an accessory. He's showing kindness to someone who needed it. That used to mean something to you." Frank's jaw worked silently, and Thomas could see the war playing out behind his eyes. This was a man who had built his life on control, on the absolute loyalty of his family, and now that foundation was cracking. "You're my daughter," Frank said finally, his voice rough with emotion he was trying to hide. "I can't just let you go. You can't stop me from going either. Not anymore." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of approaching hoofbeats, not from the direction Frank's men had come, but from the east. Thomas felt his heart sink, thinking it might be more of the gang, but then he saw the glint of a badge on the lead rider's chest. Sheriff Morrison and 2 deputies crested the hill, their horses lathered with sweat from hard riding. Someone in town must have seen the Coleman gang heading this way and sent word. Frank cursed under his breath. His head swiveling between the approaching lawmen and his daughter. His men were already reaching for their weapons, but they were outnumbered now, caught in the open with nowhere to run. "Pa," Sarah said urgently, "you can still ride out of here. Take your men and go. I'll tell the sheriff I came here on my own." Frank looked at her for a long moment, and Thomas saw something break in the older man's face. "You do that? After everything? You're still my father." Frank holstered his gun with a sharp motion, then whistled to his men. "Mount up. We're leaving." "What about the girl?" the scarred man asked. "The girl makes her own choices now." Frank swung into his saddle, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. "But if you ever change your mind, if you ever need family again, I know where to find you," Sarah finished. Frank nodded once, then spurred his horse toward the western hills. His men followed, and within minutes they were gone, leaving only dust and the echo of hoofbeats behind. Sheriff Morrison rode into the yard just as the last of them disappeared over the ridge. "Thomas, you all right?" "Fine, Sheriff, just fine." Morrison's eyes found Sarah, taking in her torn dress and the exhaustion written across her face. "Miss, are you in need of assistance?" Sarah looked at Thomas, then at the locket still clutched in his hand. "I think I might be, Sheriff. I have some things I need to confess." Years later, Thomas would remember that morning as the day he learned that courage wasn't about facing down guns or standing up to dangerous men. It was about giving someone the chance to choose who they wanted to become, even when that choice came with a price. Sarah served 2 years in the territorial prison for her part in the Coleman gang's crimes. When she was released, she came back to Thomas's ranch, not as a fugitive this time, but as a woman who'd found her way. eye to redemption. She worked his land beside him until the day he died, and when people asked why she'd stayed, she would touch the silver locket at her throat and smile. Some choices, she would tell, them were worth everything. Stories like this aren't just told, they're felt. If you felt it too, subscribe and stay with us.